Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando time-lapse series. In today's episode we will finish this area by adding the two last buildings within this gap. So before we get going today, I would like to mention that right here in a second you will see that I lose a little bit of footage. I really hate when that happens, but I just forgot to press record and it's really not that much. It's only the slope base that's made with art pieces. And for the trim and on the side, I just use wooden panels here. But every time something like this happens, it's so annoying. And luckily in this case, I noticed very quickly. But just imagine you build maybe on this building here and suddenly everything is not recorded. And so right now I made like a little improvised solution to that. Whenever I stop recording, I just enable an image in the background. And so when I'm then maybe doing a break, feed my cats or making some coffee, when I'm getting back, I see that of course, and then I know I have to press the recording button. In theory, I probably could just let the recording play out here, since whenever I'm not moving in the park, the bitrate will get tremendously lower. But the idea that you have always there recording in the background, I just don't like that. And so very hopefully this new improvised method helps us in avoiding any lost footage in the future. But so far I can assure you that at least of recording right now it will not happen any more time. Everything is there and I'm finished already with the opposing side of the main street. So as you are watching this episode right now, I'm again in another vacation, so I'm away 3 weeks here. And that's also the main reason why this video is a little bit longer. But when I'm then back home again, so at the end of July, I have so much more time to record those episodes. And the main part, as always, that's just very time consuming, is the voicing of it. So for an episode like this one here, and that's over 1 hour, I certainly need 1 week to properly record that. And the big part that really takes up time is just the voicing of it. And I don't feel like rushing it. You would feel that after it. So I feel like it's much better to invest a little bit more time, regardless if I'm now in a vacation or not. The quality of the episode later on is just what matters here. And if an episode takes 2 weeks to create, then it's like that. After all, everything you are seeing within this episode stays within this episode. And therefore it doesn't make any sense at all to let the quality of the episode down just because I want to get something out very quickly. I mean, I tried already on recording the next episode, but it's so much stuff to do and I can't make it realistically in time. And so therefore we will have here a 2 or 3 week break, and after that we will start much more actively on the opposing side of the main street. But with those things out of the way, we should come back now to the actual episode today. And so the first building we are building on is this corner building, where I believe its purpose is mainly to serve here as like this maintenance building or like this backlot building where this horse-drawn tram is located. So the challenge here on this building was primarily to already have in mind that this tram might work actually in the park itself, and therefore this entrance gate that we are creating here, it has to work in some way. And so since you will see this door later on both sides, I had to already keep in mind the thickness of this door when creating it. Right here I did not use any art pieces for that. I used those coaster support beams. And the main reason for that was just the scale LOD thing again. So if you have here like an art piece that is 5%, it will disappear if you move beyond 50 meters. And that's of course for such an important part where this door will open later on, where you see it a little bit from far away. It would be horrible if this whole door would disappear in some way. And therefore I used now those coaster support beams. When it comes now to actually animate this whole door or this gate, you will see that I use here rotational pistons for that. I've placed them a little bit off axis, like in reality, where you have those hinges on the outside of the door. And in that way, when the door is closed, the door will actually align also with the door frame around it. Otherwise, you would see that it collides on the edges of the frame. And so when I tried then to animate this gate, I quickly noticed that there isn't really any animation in the game, at least at the time of recording, that would really work here. I mean, you have those oscillating modes there in all variations where the door will open and then it will close literally after 1 second. And that's of course something when you have now a coaster or some train that has to pass by within this time frame, it's almost impossible to time that. And so luckily within the last update, they added there 4 new animation types. So ultra fast, very slow and ultra slow. So when you for example place now a rotational piston down in your world, they will perform those animations endless. But if you attach that rotational piston now to a display sequencer, then it will only perform 1 animation of that. And so when you take a look on all the animations we have so far in this game, you will notice that there isn't any break or where you can set the specific amount of time that should pass until the animation plays back. I mean, theoretically, it would even work without any break at all. So indirectly, where you just make an animation playing out, and then you could reassign this object that it's playing the animation reverse. But again, then you have the issue, of course, with animations that are continuous. So something like here, when you have a very fast animation, if it's completing 1 full turn, but you only want a quarter of that, then it will also not work. So I feel like it's much better if you just add like a little component there where you can set your own time frame where the animation just stops. So as I said, if you just take a look right now on this system, then a break of this door should not be possible. But luckily, we have here people in this game that are so creative that think around the box how to make it possible within the limitations of the tools we have in this game. So you probably might guessed it already who I'm talking about here. It's again Techie3D. I mean, this guy is such a madman, and all those things that we already had where we thought previously they would just not work. So something like those invisible paths, he made that possible before the devs brought out that feature. And also here we have the same thing happening where he comes up with a solution. I will link his video here in the description, where he has this brilliant idea of using 2 rotational pistons so that the animation would counteract each other. So that means that you place 1 rotational piston within another one and you make them face each other. And that way, when you assign the same animation on it, you will just see nothing happening because both of them counteracting each other. And when you now make an offset of that, you will see that 1 piston will start to move, and at the very end, since the other one will elapse at a certain point, it will bring back the whole thing to its original state. And in that way you have here a doorway animation that will open and close after a specific amount of time, that you perfectly can adjust also to your liking. I probably have a hard time here to explain it properly to you, but please just watch the video of Techie3D because it's absolutely ingenious and it shows very well what you can do with that. It's not only meant to be used now for a doorway, but literally anything where you have to play back an animation, have then a break of a specific amount of time, and then let the whole thing reset to its original state. That's exactly where this method comes in use for. And so who knows where we might need this method later on, when creating maybe Jungle Cruise with all those animatronics, or Space Mountain where we might have to have their space door open or something like that. But coming back to our gate here, at some point I will create exactly this method here, and where we also build then our very own horse-drawn tram here. Although with those horses I'm not too sure. I of course know that there are certain people that also animated some actual horses in this game with art pieces, but so far I feel like we shouldn't really stuck ourselves too hard on that. But other than those horses, I feel like that this scene will look absolutely amazing later on. You just have this corner building, and those doors will open slightly, and then after some time this tram will drive out. I'm still a little bit unsure how the actual layout or the path of this tram will look later on. I mean, when you imagine it takes now this turn of the main hub, it follows the main street itself up to the big central hub, then it performs this big circle around there, and then it comes back the same way. And the thing where it really becomes a little bit tricky is how to properly get this tram back into this building here, I believe. So far my plan is that you have on the surface this track ride, this little toy train or something like that, and its only job here is for the visuals of it. You only see those train tracks there. And the actual ride that you will see then later moving here is a copy of the same toy train. It's just 5 meters below that. And so when the ride is actually playing out, you would see this little toy train driving below the ground there. And then we will just attach scenery onto this ride that will of course be visible on the surface of it. That's at least the plan so far. I'm still not 100% sure if it's actually working like that, but I feel like we have always here room for improvisation, and when there's something not working correctly 100%, we surely come up with a good enough alternative to that. I mean, when I think back when we started here on Orlando, at that time there were so many things that were just not possible, that are right now possible. Just thinking of those path limitations and that you couldn't animate any light in the game. But still, they didn't really hold us up in any way, just because the progression of the development of this game is just way faster than we are right now recreating in this park. And who knows when we might reach the castle or Tomorrowland and all those other thematic areas, we have a complete different planned coaster than now. At least that's my hope in some way, because when I imagine myself starting tomorrow on Adventureland, I just know that we lack here essential pieces for that theming. In theory, you could probably start that, but we would try so hard in recreating those animatronics. And so therefore I just hope and beg Frontier again, please bring back this Adventurepack. You had there so many amazing elements and items in there. Not only those temple pieces that you could recolor and they had a beautiful texture on them, but especially those animatronics were so golden. Back in the prequel in Anaheim, they gave so much to the atmosphere of this area. And especially for the ride itself, you needed there some things to look at. That's the thing about Jungle Cruise, that you see there some live animals. Otherwise, this ride would be pretty scary when driving through a jungle that has literally no animals within it. On Reddit, I saw already that there were many people out there that created their own animatronics within this game. So where they create their own dinosaur with art pieces, and there we are again at Taggy 3D, right? So I'm absolutely sure that with enough time and patience you could very well recreate every animatronic there is. But it's just the point, why do that if you could have all of those pre-made ones from the prequel? Who knows, maybe as you're just listening, that's actually what they are doing right now. I could very well imagine that. I mean, they have to provide something there in the future, since they reached now this point where they don't follow their monthly update policy. So after this 6th update, it's the first time for them that they won't bring another update within the next month. But even here you have to be cautious to even mention something like that, because you never know. At least when I think myself into those shoes of them as a developer of this game, I could very well imagine that you just need now some time to figure out what should come next after those updates. They brought now the game to a state where you could say it's a true sequel of this game. It's not a perfect sequel, no doubts about that, but it's a good enough sequel, I think. And so surely they have to refigure now the standpoint from a game developer, but at the same time also from this company that has to make money in some way. When you take a look on the actual amount of players or people that bought this game compared to Plant Zoo, then you can surely assume that from a financial standpoint, Plant Zoo is much more attractive for them, and where it also makes much more sense to create content on a long term for all those players. And in the end, that's what I think will come next after those monthly updates. When you don't see an increase of people actually buying this game, then you have in some way kinda rely on all those people that already bought your game. And therefore you have to create content or paid content for all those people. And that's, I think, the natural continuation of their monthly update policy that they bring on now, all those DLCs. I mean, DLC by itself alone, this term is pretty critical, I would say. Just let's call it expansion packs. But at least in my opinion, that's the right way. If you make those packs so good enough by all the content that you're getting there, so not only some rides or some foliage, you get full stretched scenery packs that make sense within them. So for example, a scenery theme where you are sized down as a human being to the size of an ant, and everything around you is scaled up, and you have the huge mushrooms and flying bees and insects roaming around you. Already this could be like another idea for a scenery pack. But at the same time you could also think about different architecture styles, so maybe a Baroque or Gothic style, where you have all the ornaments to create a church or a big cathedral of that time. And already you can think them also in a specific series, that you not only have one architecture style but 3 or 4 that following up. As I'm saying all of those things, I'm very well aware that all of those things will take much time and effort to create. Maybe that's also the reason why they do now this intentional break, and where they really have to figure out what comes next after it. Once you have decided to go a specific road here, you most certainly want to finish that. If you decide probably on a Japanese theme, then you want to finish that and not halfway through abort it and work on something else. Well, that's kind of the beauty of unpredictiveness here again, of their own development phase. We don't know where they will go. At some point you will see this unlocked stream popping up again, most certainly, that will tell us all about the future of this wonderful game. And so maybe at this stage, let's look where we are in the footage. I'm seeing that we almost finished now this greenish corner building here. As I said earlier, the most difficult part was how to deal with the actual gate on front of it. But the actual construction of it, it's pretty simplified in terms of all those other different architecture styles around it. What's pretty noteworthy after looking a little bit on this building is that it's so far the only building that features one floor. All other buildings we built on had at least 2 floors on it. And at the same time, it's also the first building that falls out of this orthogonality. So it features a 45-degree anglement. When you take a look on the opposing side, we don't have there such a building. We only have this angled gateway to the backlot. It breaks up this symmetry, and in that way this corner building by itself becomes very unique. After reflecting that, it makes of course much more sense now to emphasize this building with its own unique functionality of being that tram building. No other building we see on Main Street has such a function except maybe the railroad station. So when you imagine having this building solely by itself here, it would look a little bit like an outsider or lonely. To say it in the terms of Bob Ross, every little one-storied building needs a friend here, and therefore we are building right now on the barbershop right next to it. And I really don't know where this motive comes from, that literally when you take a look on every main street out in the world, you have at least one barbershop always there. When you imagine you have your Victorian-styled town here, all people that would roam around those streets here, they would follow the etiquette of that given era, of what would be the fashion of that time. When we speak from the Victorian-styled era, it's a very long period, so roughly from the 1840s up to the 1900s. And therefore every person within this time, it not only applied to the fashion what they are wearing, but also what haircut they would have. And most males would also wear a specific form of beard. And that's of course the place where our barbershop comes in now. We need a place for all those gentlemen where they get their hair dressed and their mustache cut. And back then those barbershops were not only about exactly that, but they would also offer their services as a dentist. I mean, from today's perspective, it just seems very crazy that you not only go there because you have to get your hair nice, but also to get your teeth removed, which is just ridiculous in some way, but back then that was the way how they dealt with that. When you come from a time where you don't have this luxury of having a narcotic against those pains, then I feel it's just another issue that you have alongside all those very bad illnesses of that time. I mean, you also had tuberculosis, and that was a huge illness at that time. Today it's easily treatable, but back then many people suffered from that. So I feel like that those people that lived back then, just because they didn't know all about those luxuries of today, that was the everyday life for them. And if you don't miss them, then you don't think about that too much. You just have to accept that. And so when you imagine you are one of those lucky folks that have a bad teeth and you need it removed, then you just go to your local barbershop. But there's also much more than only the pure service of being a barbershop, and that is that special music style that evolved from those barbershops. It's the barbershop music. And the history on that is a little bit obscure. I looked on it. It's really not that easy to find really a reference where it really came from. But I just guess all those people within the barbershop that maybe worked there, they could very well be musicians at night. And already during the day, they maybe learn or train a little bit while singing for the shift that awaits them at night. I mean, while making all those haircuts, why not just sing and entertain the guests around you by doing that? At least what is known is that the barbershop music becomes much popular in the 1900s, and there's even a revival of that in the 1940s and 50s. So when you are on YouTube, maybe after watching this video, just enter Barbershop Harmony Society, and there you will see a perfect example of what music I'm talking about here. It's this non-instrumental music style that only consists out of 4 mostly male singers that have different tonal voices. So you have one bass, then a baritone, then a lead singer, and then a tenor with a very high voice. And when you combine them, you get really nice harmonies where you can really play with this syncopation. And that's the great part, because ragtime, that also uses a lot of syncopation within it, you can take all those rags and rendition them now in this pure non-instrumental way. In that way, you aren't bound now to any instrument that has to be there in 3D space. So for ragtime, normally you would have to need a piano here. But because this music is produced by only human beings, they can transfer their own voice to any place throughout this whole main street on the go. But it's not only the music itself, it's also the presentation of it. When you take a look on all those singers, they usually wear a uniform in some way, and the only difference between them from the visual is oftentimes the height of those singers. Maybe that has also to do with the tonal shifts between them, where maybe the guy with the highest voice is the smallest in size. Oftentimes they call themselves also a very distinct name, that makes them comparable to other barbershop quartets. So right here in the Magic Kingdom, they call themselves the Decadents, and where already the wordage of that implies that they are very ordinary, or where they follow this etiquette of being very gentlemanlike. Maybe that's also part of the origin where those boy bands come from. So for example, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. All those bands, in some way, they are an abstract form of what was originally a barbershop quartet in some way. I mean, this subject is probably very heavily debatable if it's really in that origin of that, but at least for the atmospheric of our main street here, this sort of music style and the presentation of it is vital to make this place a lot more lively, and that this magic of this era really comes to shine. And so to come back now to our build here, you see we are constructing this little barbershop facade. When I look on the actual architecture of that, it's very geometric. It almost reminds me to an Art Deco style, where you have a lot of geometric ornaments happening. And in the middle of this building you see that you have this hexagonal shape happening, where the bottom part steps into the background and the top part steps forward and serves as this little canopy above it. When creating this building now in the game, I already noticed that we really have to struggle here against the scalability again. Since this facade that you see here, the width of it is roughly 4 meters, and that is really not big. And all those little cassettes and little ornaments that I'm placing right now down, I mean, they are already so small scaled, and you even have their art pieces within 5% that will of course disappear at some point. But still, I think you will not see that too much on this building, and where you will see it much more apparent on the buildings on the right with those awnings. But overall, I'm very satisfied with the visuals of it. Turned out pretty greatly with this contrast happening of those trims and then the surfaces in a different color. And this makes the whole building really pop into your eye, I believe. Right here, I'm also making the lamp on the outside of the wall. And I used again like this little roundish lamp. It has a shaft attached to it. And I would love it so much if you would just have this roundish bulb, just that as a lamp, without any shaft at all, because then you could create much more interesting lanterns in your park as well. You will see that later on when we are creating another lantern type in this park, where this shaft comes in our way and we have to use it in some way to make it work in the end. And so I believe if you would have here another set of just basic geometric shapes that would just serve as some lamp and that have this blooming effect on it, this would be absolutely great, and it would be really no effort to create that. I mean, just use all those different art shapes and make them illuminated. Alone this would be our own separate scenery pack already. And I feel like this has so much potential there. Then you could create your own customized light strips that are even animated in some way. At least for us here in the park, something like this would be absolutely amazing, since we have so many different customized lantern types. We just can't see realistically create them just out of those pre-made lamps that are always way too themed, or they have something on the back that is just disturbing. And I hate to say it, but exactly those things, at least in some form, we had in Planet Coaster 1. We had their colorized panels that you could animate, and there were even lit and unlit versions of them. So for example, in Anaheim on Space Mountain, in the station building, I've used those panels to animate like this pulsating effect on the ceiling on it. And I would just love if we would have them back. I mean, all those things that we had back then, also the possibilities of the display sequencer back then, where you could exactly time everything, although it was inconvenient to properly set all those values, but it worked in some way. I mean, right now with this new timeline thing in the display sequencer, I'm not too sure if you can exactly do all the things that we did back then. We will have to figure that out at some point. Also in the prequel we had an additional sequencer of some sort where you could set the individual ride cam for every ride in the game. So for example, if a coaster hits a certain point of the track, you could set there the individual time of the day or that the lighting becomes nighttime. And you even had their specific LOTs where you could alter the ride cam with specific colored filters or effects that allowed for so much creative freedom in how to create not only the coaster by itself but also what you are seeing then later on. But it's just sometimes very weird for me to properly understand them, because why would you exclude something like that from the sequel when you have that in the prequel? So something like those cameras that you could place down in this display sequencer, they are gone. Or something like this ride cam sequencer, it's also gone. And so maybe this is the perfect transition now to the 6th update, since I of course played it already, and I feel like overall it's a great update, especially the thing with those souvenir shops and that you can customize your own shelves there and decide on what merchandise articles are going to be sold on that. It's just so great, and it really gives a lot of creative freedom there. And to have this extra level of immersion when guests enter your store and they look around, they might buy something and then they walk out with a little bag alongside with them. In combination with the restaurant thing, that's absolutely what I like to see in this game. You not only build now this park purely and just watch it later on, but the way in how you build now those restaurants or gift shops, they kinda get tested later on or simulated in some way when guests using them. So in that way, at least to some extent, what you are creating there, you have to be cautious about that the place works in some way like in reality. I will say here to an extent, because I'm pretty sure that you just can't simulate reality with this guest simulation here. But even if it's only slightly true, then I feel like this makes the whole game a lot more simulation-like, with an emphasis on the management side. I'm not entirely sure how challenging it is to create a great gift shop that makes much more profit than a very bad one, and we probably never find out here. But if that is the case, then this game becomes not only now attractive for simulation lovers, but also for management game lovers. I feel like a lot of people are currently not playing this game because they aren't so much into the building of a theme park completely in sandbox. They are maybe a different kind of player where it's more about the challenging part of the economy of it. They are caring much more about the experience of fine-tuning this park to the best efficiency and earning the most profit and revenue at the end. And where it's really not so much about the actual appearance and visual of the park. It's more about just plopping down some buildings, position them in the smartest way possible to create the biggest earnings in the end. So at least in my opinion or perception, I literally don't know any person out there in my surrounding that plays this game purely for the management side of the game, and maybe more for this more challenging approach how to really might try hard through the career mode. So something that we saw in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2. That's what I think made those games so great, since you had a really nice challenge by having so many different maps there, where you really had to refigure your strategy within each of those maps of creating a successful park in the end. And so at least when I see the career mode here in this game, I just feel like that the challenge of actually creating now those parks there, I mean, it's very easy, I would say. Mostly you just plop down some rides there and then that's it. They already generate so much revenue that you don't literally have to care about anything else. There is no long-term challenge goal there to really now give an extra effort into that and to really go try hard here and to invest a lot of time into that. And therefore, I'm afraid that a lot of people that are more of that kind of type of player, they just left this game already. They aren't so much interested into it since the challenging part of it is non-existent in some way. Although I have to say, until now, I believe that this part where you now have those gift shops in the game, it brings a little bit back of that challenging part of creating now a gift shop that is purely based on efficiency. That it might be great to figure out a strategy within this gift shop itself, how to boost the efficiency when selling those items in the best way that it makes the biggest profit in 1 hour, for example. And all of that is dependent on the right layouting of that, how you position those shelves and how to lure those guests in. If you place maybe a gift shop after a specific ride, that everybody that exit out of the ride have to go through that. And so in that way, you can really think a little bit more into that micro tuning, where to position now this gift shop and where it makes much more sense in the park itself. And so therefore you have to think about how your theme park is actually working and operating. And so very hopefully with the integration of those gift shops, we might get a little portion of those players back. I mean, when you take a look on another game, City Skylines, I feel like you have the same thing happening. You have a separation between the players that play this game a lot more like a sandbox and where they create their own customly designed projects within it. And then you have, I would guess, the broad majority of those players that are playing this game mainly for the fun, but maybe also for their challenging aspect of being a management game. And therefore it's always a mixture of those two things where it's really hard sometimes, I believe, to find a common ground. Right here in Planco it works overall pretty fine, I think, but it's just way too easy to create a successful theme park within it. And to be quite honest here, I'm not exactly sure how to make it much more difficult. Maybe it's just the pure nature of this game in some way. I mean, sure, you could of course make those maps a lot harder by generating very difficult landscape to work with and make the terraforming costs very high. On the other side, you could of course also increase the threshold until a guest will become happy very high. But those things, I feel like that's not really what a player that wants to have a challenging experience looks for. Those are just like modifications to the difficulty. What I mean by actually making the game much more challenging is that in order to solve a specific problem here, you have to be smart enough to come up with your own solution to that and then to earn the rewards of that. I feel like it's quite complicated to explain that here. What I don't mean is that you just modify the pure difficulty on specific factors that are already in the game itself, but instead rely on the player's intelligence to figure out specific solutions that work much more effectively, for example on those gift shops. If you arrange them in a smart enough order, then you will make much more profit in the end. And so I believe this gift shop example shows it pretty well what I mean here. I would really like if the management side of this game rewards your own smartness. And I know this is probably very hard to implement or to even get some ideas going about that. But I feel like when you want to have a challenging experience in any game there is, it's the part where I get the most satisfaction out of everything, when I really have to use my own creative intelligence in some way. If I just have here a gameplay mechanic in the game, so let's take Elden Ring for example. If you fight there a boss and the hardness of this boss just gets harder because he has much more HP, then the whole thing just seems a little bit boring and repetitive. And therefore it would be so much more cooler if this boss suddenly has much different variations how to react to me as I'm fighting him. And therefore I have to figure out our own solution and adapt my own fighting style to that. I mean, it's a wild example, and to compare it now to Planco, I think it's hilarious, but that's just the thing I try to get around here. That you design this game maybe in some way, that you have to use a little bit more of your own smartness in some way. I mean, another game that I'm just playing very recently is Noita. It's like this 2.5D roguelike wizard simulation where every pixel that you see on the screen is simulated. And you have to fight enemies there and pick up certain wands, and you can modify those spells on those wands. And that's the core concept of this game, that you are creative enough and, let's say, smart enough to figure out their specific solutions, that you rearrange those wands and those spells in such a way that they let you fight all those much more powerful enemies down below. And that's the very rewarding thing about this game, when you suddenly realize that the wand that you have created in a very creative way suddenly becomes a god wand and you can literally destroy everything with it. But it only works because you had all of those learning experience before that you needed in order to understand the mechanics of this game, how this spell system works in some way. That's the rewarding thing. It's because you have to actually be smart enough to progress in this game, otherwise you will just die. And it's not only affecting Noita, it's also the same thing with one game I mentioned earlier in another episode that's called The Witness. It's the same thing there. You have to be smart enough in some way to actually make progress within it. And that's the rewarding thing about it. And again, those examples might seem very abstract and in a way also hilarious, but I feel you just need something like that to make the game really addicting in some way. Otherwise, it's just a sandbox game. I mean, we surely can think a little bit around the box here. Why not just create a game mode in this game that's a little bit more roguelike? So maybe you start off just by 3 rides and a little bit of one scenery pack, and then you just have to keep going until you reach a specific amount of revenue at each month, where you then can pick and choose like another ride or something different. And maybe if your park doesn't perform like it should be, then you get reset in some way. I mean, right now in the game you can go into the sandbox settings and you have a lot of settings there that you can theoretically increase or decrease. So in theory, you could save out your park here and adjust it to a little bit of a harder setting, but still something like a scenario editor, like we had in Planco 1, for example, would work so much better here, since you could set your own goals there that you would have to fulfill in some way. And at least when I go now into those settings right here, who would intentionally increase those values to have a much harder experience by playing this game? I mean, it would work the other way around. If somebody out there creates like a very interesting scenario with some limitations there, then I would of course be very interested in beating this challenge. But if I have to create the challenge on my own here, who does that? And so to finally conclude now this topic, they should bring back this scenario editor, mainly to allow at least the players themselves to create challenges for other players. In this way, the replayability of this game should increase tremendously when you have there a giant pool of scenarios to pick and choose from. I mean, right now I saw that you can use every career map that is in the game also as a sandbox map, but still, if I don't have there a specific goal where I have to work towards, and where it's not only just, okay, I need in the 3rd year now so and so much revenue, but where it's more of that dynamic progression, where you might not even start as a theme park, you just build a hotel or like a restaurant and go from there. You have to turn around every cent that you are spending. And in that way, this whole experience would become much more, let's say, life-threatening, because you have to care about your little shop that you have there. And maybe you have to fire certain staff members just because they are just taking too much money. And in that way, this progression towards a real theme park, which will cost millions and millions of dollars, feels a lot more dynamic. And it's not like, oh, you have now like $50,000 and suddenly you can create your own coaster like that. I mean, even this event that you have your own very coaster there suddenly, this should be a crucial point of this game. It's the core aspect of this game, that you create your own coaster and maybe make it therefore one of those final goals in the mid to late game. And that's why I'm saying there is so much hidden space behind this idea of creating a theme park game. You can of course create on one side the perfect sandbox simulation game where we can create now our own very Magic Kingdom within it. But on the other side you can also make it almost like this live simulation where you just start off like a staff member you own and you slowly have to build up enough budget to afford your own gift shop. And then maybe later on create an entire restaurant around it. And so at least in my opinion, since I'm playing a lot of roguelike games out there, something like this would absolutely drag me in. It's kinda this game idea where you start as a dishwasher and at some point you become the king of all theme parks there are, right? And this aspect that you actually are playing maybe even as a person within the park you are just creating, that's something where I still don't get why they don't make it a much greater thing. Where you actually can be your own personality in the park that can not only interact with the rides and shops within it, but actually could interact also with those guests, and that they would get a specific boni when your avatar is right beside them. So a quick game reference here, Evil Genius. In this game you played like this super maniac that wanted to conquer the world, and you built your own little super evil base there. And whenever your evil genius runs around, all your minions would get specific bonies alongside that, and they would work much harder. So something like that where you immerse yourself as the creator of this park, not only by having this God mode perspective all the time, but you could actually dig into this park yourself because you are playing within it as a character. There's just so much potential, I feel like. And when you transfer that to multiplayer, I mean, it only can get better here. You could actually visit now your friend's park and you could both roam around it in a third or first person. How cool would that be? As I'm saying all those things, I'm very aware that most certainly those things are not going to happen here. There's just too much risk attached to that and you drive into the unknown. But even if they would only transfer one of those things, I feel like it could kinda help in bringing back some of those players that might left Planet Coaster 2 behind. And after all, that's all we want, that the game gets much more successful and continued in the future. And so after that long and hard monologue again, we come back now to the build, and you probably saw quite a bunch of stuff that I built during this monologue, especially the creation of this lantern, and I spent literally hours on end just to come up with a solution to that. The main issue was that when you take a look on the reference image here, you'll see the top part of this lantern, how it's constructed. So you have the half of a sphere at the very top of it. Underneath there you have like a disc with those triangles that are sticking out at the very edge of that. And underneath you have like this hollow glass tube that surrounds the light bulb within it. And to create now this formation within Planet Coaster, I just found very difficult to come up with some pieces even. Especially on the part where you have this glass tube, you literally don't have any piece at all in the game that would work here. I looked up those glass sheets, but they are way too thick that they would fit within to that small scale. And therefore in Planet Coaster 1, I think I already talked about that, we had there some gemstone pieces exactly in that shape. And so since that is not possible here, I decided to use this little lantern that I used as an ornament on the Chamber of Commerce building, and that fitted surprisingly well here. And the best part about that was that it also had a blooming effect at night, like those round lanterns. And therefore, those two things fit now perfectly together, and when you have nighttime here in the park, it looks pretty gorgeous. Also something regarding the lighting here in this park. Even before starting on the roof of the Emporium building here, I already redid the lighting in this park, because that was the exact time where the 5th update came out and where you had now the ability to animate those lights. So in theory I should have shown you that already, but I decided against that because it didn't fit it to anything we built so far. And it wouldn't make sense you see me suddenly go half an hour back to the railroad station and rework the lighting the whole episode. And therefore we skipped it for now, and maybe in 3 to 4 episodes, once we done the other side of the main street, we come back to that. So right in the footage you see that I create this iconic signature of the Emporium building, and you also have like those side panels here that say dry goods, nations and toys. In reality you have there like some little arrows or like some arches around it. I tried to recreate that here with some exclamation symbols, but it just didn't look any good, so I removed that again. And so right about this time you could kinda say we finished now this side of the main street. We only adding here a few last minor things and small details. I'm aware, of course, when I rewatch this footage right now, that there are a lot of things that I just missed. So for example, on the gate in front of this corner building, I completely forgot to place those iron supports on the outside of the wall. And so as I said, there's a bunch of those things that I just did not manage to see at the time of recording, or I just ignored that for now until we get better pieces for that. And so what you see me doing right now is to, you could say, make a complete overhaul of the flooring of this main street. So far you see that we have this vanilla asphalt texture there, just from those paths. And the visual of this texture is actually pretty good, I like it. But when you look on the actual flooring in the park itself, you have those precasted slabs there. And the whole main street follows this logic that you have there on the sidewalk those smaller slabs, and on the street itself much bigger slabs. And the thing where it becomes now really tricky is that of course the horse-drawn tram that goes around this main hub, it also features our own slab that follows it. And so in some way we have to kinda react here to this flooring. It just looks a little bit wrong when you think about it for a second. As I said, all of those slabs are precasted. That means they got created in a manufacture, and from there they traveled to this park and then they got placed into the place they gone. And therefore also the section with the tram, it already got created with the track of the tram included. And that's kind of the main reason why I decided now to overhaul this flooring. When I started out on placing those slabs here, I was a little afraid that they might look too smooth in their texture. When you compare them right beside the vanilla asphalt, there's a huge difference in between there. But once I plastered the whole main hub here, at some point it kinda looked pretty good, I feel like. And especially when you take a look on those slabs from a steep angle, so like in those cinematic shots that I showed earlier, you have there like this very distinct shiny effect that sparkles through, where you almost see the reflection of the building behind or beside it. And so at least when I look, for example, on this reference image here, you also have in some way this happening, where almost the sun is bouncing off the very smooth surface of this asphalt. I mean, you sometimes have this effect when you are on a very long highway and you look to the horizon, and then you have like this little mirror effect at the very end. So it kinda imitates this little illusion. When you of course look onto this asphalt, you will have nowhere near any spot that is super smooth and reflective. But at least when you look from a very steep angle, from very far away, you have this happening. In a way, I kinda mimicked it here. At least to me it looks pretty gorgeous, way better than the vanilla asphalt, and it has something special about it, I don't know. And so as I already said in another episode, the great thing about those slabs is that each of them is separate, and therefore we can recolor them a tiny bit later on, since all of them are unique in some way. That's maybe the reason why they went for individual slabs here. If one slab gets damaged in some way, at least when I look on them, they make the appearance to me that they are pretty sturdy, But still, if something happens here, and for example the track of the tram is a little bit off and they might have to modify that section, they can just pick that out and replace it with another one. And so you have here the benefit of modularity. If you imagine having one big surface of asphalt here in this main street, you sometimes see it on parking lots where you have huge places and everything is covered with one sheet of asphalt. And then over time, as you have weather happening, and especially in Florida, I can imagine it gets very hot, you get those cracks in the asphalt. And every time you want that kinda removed or fixed, you have to either cast directly the asphalt on top of that, then you get a really nice patchwork in the end, or you completely cut that section out and cast it in complete new. At least here in Germany, every time you see the Autobahn having a construction site there, 95% of the time it's because you have there a Fahrbahnerneuerung happening. So they have to lay there some new asphalt to fix all those holes and the horrible condition of the already casted asphalt there. But I mean, heat can be one of those really nasty things you have to care about. It's not only happening to the asphalt right here, it's also affecting every building that you see in this park, and all of those rides, especially coasters, they are made out of steel, and steel, when you have direct sunlight coming, it will get easily over 60 or sometimes 80 or 100 degrees. So I don't want even to imagine how much maintenance work you have to do that gets inflicted by weather conditions. And it's not only affecting the whole park and all rides within it, but also every human being that there is. Especially right now in Germany, we have very high temperatures, and it's sometimes really hard for me to stay all that cool while recording. So at least the effect on weather affects all of us in some way. We can't really avoid that. We can kinda feel the effect of climate change on our own selves. And one thing is for sure, the future will not get better in any way in that regard. Especially on places that already have a very low sea elevation, so locations like Netherlands or parts of northern Germany. Some of those places will be in danger in 30 or 40 years from now. I don't want to make you in any way afraid of that. But when you take, for example, this park here, the Magic Kingdom, you have here a sea elevation of 30 meters. And for example in Anaheim in Los Angeles of 40 meters. And so when we speak of the increase of sea elevation over the next 100 years, for example, then there are predictions that it's around half a meter or 1 meter, depending on how bad the scenario will be in the future. And beyond that, it gets of course worse and worse and worse, and the curvature gets much steeper after that. And so maybe by 2300 you might have here a sea level elevation change of almost 5 meters. And those effects are of course not absolute. They are kinda snowballing, and there are different elements that take place, and you can't really calculate it that perfect, I feel like. In some way I'm kinda happy that those places, the Magic Kingdom and also the Anaheim Park, are kinda in a location where they are pretty safe. So we most certainly will not see that much of the consequences of that in our lifetime. And that's kinda great for us, but very bad for the next generations of this planet. You can't of course foresee what technologies we might have in the future that will kinda and hopefully save us from that. But when there's really nothing changing and everything goes according to those scenarios, then we will have here some deep dangers in the future. And as I'm saying this, as you might watch from the future, I hope that humankind didn't screw it up. If they did, I'm so sorry. But as we are continuing now building this park, in a way we always creating here our own time capsule. Maybe in 200 or 300 years, if somebody is watching this, I mean, I would be very interested about that. I most certainly can't read your comments, I'm so sorry about that, but this park is in some way preserved within this recording, or at least my interpretation of it. And hopefully my interpretation is somewhat accurate, that it makes a good enough replica of what was the Magic Kingdom in Orlando in the 2020s. But who knows, maybe you are watching from Mars or who other planet is out there, and you might even have your own Disneyland on top of this planet. I would be very excited how this would look like. And you might even have your proper space mountain with actual flying spaceships there. But to come back now to our own timeline, I would like to talk now about what you see in this footage right now. So for several minutes we are building now on the main hub, and we redid the entire curvature around it. And that was mainly by the aerial image that we have now in the game that shows us the proper curvature of that. At the very start of this time-lapse series, I talked about that until we have those billboards, we can't really manage to get the perfect curvatures of especially around objects, and that's exactly what we do now. So I first made the slabs now also on the main hub, then after it I redid the curvature of the sidewalk, and right now I'm also adjusting the track of the tram. And you can see it a little bit when I adjusting there the exact curvature of this tram, where I'm in the coaster building mode. This is the only experience of the coaster builder. For the next couple of 1,000 hours probably, we will not create any ride here, just because there's so much scenery that we have to build first. And so this little tram here is the only ride for now that we are granted in some way. And so I had here my first experiences with this coaster builder, or the UI where you can build your coaster here. The first thing that I noticed here that you have now two modes. You have a construction mode and an edit mode. So for example, if you are in the edit mode, you can select a specific track piece and adjust it from there on. And in the construction mode, you just pick one end of the track and construct it from there on. And so coming from the prequel, back then we had pretty much only one mode where you could do both things at the same time. So in that regard, it's a little bit inconvenient because you have always to go back if you want to adjust a curvature or something. You have to go back, press on edit mode, and then you can select your piece there. So you have another click here. But on the other hand, you have now the ability that you can select a section of the track and have so much more freedom how to smooth it. So you can set that it only applies to the curvature of the track or only banking of the track. And that's especially useful when you have to be very accurate to a recreation, right? So with this new coaster builder, I created now the curvature of this tram second time. And after that, as you see, I added those slabs onto that. Sadly, there was no other way than by hand and do it manually. But after all that tiring work, the effect of this new pavement that we have now, it gives something special, I feel like. When you take a look on all those buildings that we already created and that have so many details on them, why not just include the floor with them? Whenever we are looking on this park, 60% at least is the floor of it, and therefore it makes so much sense to apply the same amount of degree of realism also to the flooring of it. So overall, I think that the appearance of this floor looks now much better, and the only thing that annoys me a little bit, and I did not thought about that when creating this footage here, is that the track of the tram is actually sticking out a little bit above the pavement. And you will especially see that on the corner building, where it collides with the gate. And that's of course pretty unrealistic, and where I can see myself move this whole thing a little bit closer to the ground, so that we almost have the effect that this track of the tram is directly into the pavement embedded. I also thought about going ultra realistic when you imagine making a section through this track. You have there this U shape, and in theory the wheels on the tram itself, they fit exactly in between that. And so on all coasters and track rides we have in the game, we have there sadly only round sections or T-shaped sections, and that's in some way not really going to work here. And therefore the toy train track is, I think, the most fitting one, since it also features roughly the same scale. So right here we have a width of exactly 1 meter, and that's very close to the width that we have in the real park. What I still would like to add here when I see this footage, on those switches where the tram splits up in 2 directions, you could say, in reality you have there like the mechanic of this switch embedded within that. And whenever the switch is switching, you would see there like this little track moving to the right side or to the left side of it. But as I said also prior, there are still so many little details that you could add here in the future that we are intentionally or not skipping for now. And after all, one thing is for sure, we will not run out on details to be recreated here. So the last things within this episode is just a little bit of preparation for the next episode. We already setting here the sidewalk for the opposing side and making sure that the tram is actually in the center of this park, just so that in the next episode we have a smooth transition to the other side and can already layouting this very iconic corner building of the confectionery. When creating that and also those buildings at the side of it, I noticed that it did not took so long like on the side we just built it on. So my approximate guess here is maybe 3 to 4 episodes until we finished also this side of the main street. And what is that? Probably episode 31 or 2, something like that. Then we will have here for the first time our whole arrangement set around the main hub. And so at this point I would like to conclude today's episode. I think we made an absolute enormous progress today. I believe I talked for almost 70 minutes now. I just hope that it wasn't too much for your ears. And you saw, of course, that I stick now with this logic that each episode starts and ends with cinematic shots in the park. I mean, after all, that's why we do it. I feel like we have to show it now, or abstractly, the park itself wants itself to be showed. The beauty wants out in some way. Whenever I cut those cinematic shots, I usually don't have to do very much. I usually pick a fitting music to it, and it kinda dictates already how those cinematic shots appear in some way. Especially the soundtrack of Trevor Kowalski is so fitting to this entire project already. Not only here but also back in the park release video. Without that, the park wouldn't just shine as it does right now. But what I'm trying to say here is that all those shots already, they stand for themselves. I'm just the director in this case to rearrange them, that the beauty comes out at the end, and that it makes sense with the music that you are hearing. In that way I believe that each episode by itself tells their own unique story, even before I start my usually approach on the time-lapse series. In the end, I would like to establish an emotional connection to you and what you are seeing and hearing, trying to give you more than just a traditional time-lapse series. I want that it sticks with people. But let's not get too melodramatic here. As I said in the beginning, as you are seeing this, I'm gone into a vacation for 3 weeks. And so at the very end of July, I'm coming back and get going to create videos for you here. So as I said, the other side of the main street is already finished, and the only thing left to do for me is to voice it. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed it today. If you did, subscribe, like or comment, become a member on this channel, join our Discord server, watch my other videos about Anaheim or Orlando, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.